Right there, on the 10 grand emerald sofa, my fiancé, Cade, was aggressively hooking up with Tess. You know, Tess, the long-lost sister I'd recently rescued from the foster system, the one I'd just bought a closet full of designer bags for. As I choked on my own blood, Cade didn't flinch. He just sighed like I was a pop-up ad interrupting his Netflix. "You always were so suffocatingly clingy, Gwen," he muttered, reaching for his shirt. Then Tess leaned over my dying body. She smelled like Cade's expensive cologne, smirking. "Thanks for the free ride, big sis," she whispered, her voice a mocking purr. "But your real dead sister says hi." Before I could even process that, my sister was a total fraud, a parasite Cade had planted to bleed my bank accounts dry. The world went black. Then gasp. I sucked in a massive breath that didn't taste like copper. The freezing marble floor and bleeding skull were gone. Instead, I was suffocating inside 50 pounds of ivory silk and French lace. I blinked at my reflection in a massive tri-fold mirror. I was standing in a high-end bridal boutique, bathed in spotlight. It was my wedding dress fitting, exactly 1 year before Cade shoved me to my death. The velvet curtain swished open, and there he was, looking like a snack in the bespoke suit my credit card paid for. He stepped onto the pedestal, wrapped his arms around my waist, and did his best "I'm obsessed with you" face for the mirror. "You look breathtaking, babe," he purred, kissing my shoulder. "Let's finish up so we can take Tess out to dinner. The poor girl needs to feel like she's part of our family." A year ago, I would have melted. Today, it took every ounce of self-control not to grab the seamstress's shears. Murder was amateur hour. Why send them to the grave when I could send them to the gutter? I leaned back against his chest, slapping on a flawless smile that hid the monster waking up inside me. "You're so sweet, babe," I chirped, making eye contact with his lying reflection. "We definitely need to make sure Tess gets exactly what she deserves." He smiled back, clueless. The seamstress bustled in, pinning the hem, oblivious. I played my part, complaining about the corset and giggling when Cade squeezed my waist. Inside my head, though, a spreadsheet was already forming. My interior design studio was booming, with a solid 7-figure net worth. Faye, my soon-to-be mother-in-law, and Tess were squatting in my Seattle townhouse, treating it like an all-inclusive resort. Cade, the struggling entrepreneur, managed my studio's finances. What a joke I had been. Once the fitting was over, I changed back into my jeans and blazer. Cade handed me my purse. "I'll drive," he offered, spinning the keys to my Porsche. "Actually," I said, snatching them mid-air, "I feel like driving today. Wedding stress, you know?" He blinked, slightly thrown off. "I never drove." Sure, babe. Whatever you want." The drive home was suffocating. He kept resting his hand on my thigh, sliding it up just far enough to make my skin crawl. I gripped the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, imagining it was his windpipe. When we walked into my townhouse, the smell of expensive truffle oil hit my nose. In the kitchen, Faye was wearing my silk apron, pouring my vintage Merlot. She didn't even look up. "Gwen, darling." Finally. Faye drawled. "Tess was getting dizzy from hunger. I had to order truffles from that Italian place using your card. I hope you don't mind. Family first, right?" Tess sauntered in, wearing one of my oversized cashmere sweaters as a dress. She gave Cade a split-second, loaded look before turning to me with big, doe eyes. "I'm so sorry, Gwen," Tess said, playing with her sleeves. "I didn't mean to be a burden. I can just eat instant ramen if money is tight." My jaw locked. Last time, I had hugged her and told her my money was her money. Not this time. I tossed my keys onto the granite counter with a loud clatter. They jumped. "Don't be silly, Tess," I said, my voice dripping with honeyed poison. "You're not a burden." But Faye, actually, the bank flagged that truffle purchase as suspicious. They temporarily froze that specific credit card. Faye nearly choked on my Merlot. Froze it? But I need to go to the spa tomorrow. I know, it's super annoying. I sighed, pouting. "Cade, babe, you'll have to use your own card to pay for dinner tonight. And probably Faye's spa day too, since your startup is doing so well." Cade's fake smile completely froze. His startup was a glorified blog that hadn't generated a dime. His entire existence was funded by my studio's accounts. Cade stammered, glancing at Tess, who suddenly looked very interested in the floor. Yeah, of course. No problem. Perfect, I clapped my hands. Oh, and Tess, keep the sweater. It looks a little stretched out anyway, and I prefer things that aren't cheapened by being passed around. Tess's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second before the victim mask slammed back into place. Cade frowned, sensing the tension. I'm going to take a quick shower before we go, I announced. As I walked up the glass staircase, I pulled out my phone. I didn't need to cry. I needed a shark. I texted Jude, the ruthless corporate lawyer. Hey Jude, need a discreet background check and a financial auditor ASAP. I'm taking out the trash. I hit send. Let the games begin. Dinner that night was a slow-motion train wreck. Watching Cade's jaw clench as he handed over his sleek metal credit card for Tess's ridiculous seafood tower was better than any Michelin star meal. I just sipped my sparkling water, watching the waiter's machine decline his card. The panic in Cade's eyes as the machine beeped was pure poetry. He had to frantically transfer funds from his secret personal savings, the ones he swore didn't exist, just to cover the tip. Back at the townhouse, the tension was thick. I smoothly excused myself to unwind, which meant slipping into my home office, locking the door, and opening an expedited Amazon package. Smoke detectors. Except these were state-of-the-art, 4K hidden cameras with motion-activated audio. I spent the next hour quietly swapping out the detectors in the living room, main hallway, and kitchen. The final one went right above my emerald velvet sofa, for security. The next morning was my masterclass in psychological warfare. Before, Tess would wander out in silk nightgowns, strategically bending over the kitchen island right as Cade walked in. I'd blow up, and Cade would gaslight me, calling me insecure. Not today. I was sipping my espresso when Tess padded into the kitchen. Right on schedule, she wore a sheer white lace slip. Cade was at the fridge, his eyes immediately gluing themselves to her chest. Morning. Tess yawned, stretching her arms so the hem rode dangerously up her thighs. Is there any almond milk? Cade swallowed, opening his mouth. But I beat him to it. Oh, honey! I cooed, rushing over with a horrified gasp. I grabbed a heavy, scratchy wool throw blanket and practically tackled her, wrapping her up like a human burrito. You must be freezing. That slip is tissue paper. We cannot have you catching a cold. Cade, turn up the thermostat, will you? Poor Tess can't even afford proper pajamas. Tess froze, her left eye twitching as she struggled against the wool. Cade cleared his throat, staring at the refrigerator door. I'm fine, Gwen, Tess ground out. Nonsense, I chirped, patting her cheek a little too hard. I'm taking you shopping later. We'll get you thick, sensible flannel sets. Can't have my precious little sister walking around looking like a cheap corner girl, right? The venomous panic in her eyes was intoxicating. Faye trudged in, ignoring the suffocating vibe. Gwen, Faye sighed, rubbing her temples. My masseuse raised her rates again. Can you just write me a quick check? My back is in knots from all this wedding planning stress. I smiled warmly. I would love to, Faye, but since the bank flagged my card yesterday, my accountant insisted on a full audit. Everything is completely frozen for 48 hours. Cade will have to cover your massage today. Cade actually choked on his own saliva. Faye looked like I'd just slapped her with a wet fish. I left them marinating in their misery and drove to a dingy diner. Jude was already sitting in a corner booth, nursing a black coffee. He looked less like a lawyer and more like a hitman, dark stubble, sharp jaw, and cold, assessing gray eyes. I slid into the booth and tossed a thick manila envelope onto the sticky Formica table. That was fast, Jude remarked, his voice a low, gravelly drawl. You texted me sounding like you were ready to hide a body. Now you just look dangerously happy. What's in the file, Gwen? Everything, I said, leaning forward. Bank statements, Cade's business accounts I still have access to, and a copy of the DNA test that miraculously proved the stray girl he brought home is my biological sister. I need you to dig deep. I want to know exactly who that girl is. Jude raised a dark eyebrow, pulling the envelope toward him. You don't buy the happy family reunion? I buy that I'm funding a circus, I replied coolly. And I'm officially firing the clowns. 48 hours later, the psychological warfare at the townhouse was reaching critical mass. But the real payoff came on Thursday night. I was at the studio. The front door chimed. Jude walked in, shaking the Seattle rain off his trench coat. He didn't say a word. He just walked up to my drafting table and tossed a thin, blue folder directly onto my blueprints. You owe me double my usual hourly rate, Jude said, pulling out a chair. Because the amount of filth I just had to wade through is staggering. My heart hammered, but my hands were steady as I opened the folder. Her real name is Sarah, Jude said, his voice slicing through the quiet room. She's a small-time grifter with a rap sheet for credit card fraud. She was in the exact same state-run orphanage as your actual sister, who tragically passed away of pneumonia 12 years ago. I stared at the mugshot paperclip to the front page. Tess, Sarah, whatever she was. And the DNA test? I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. Jude leaned forward, his gray eyes locked onto mine. Forged. She bribed a lab tech. And guess who authorized the wire transfer to pay for the fake results? Your perfect fiancé. I stared at the mugshot paperclip to the folder. Sarah, a 2-bit grifter wearing my dead sister's ghost, like a Halloween costume. The air in my studio felt too thin to breathe. It was one thing to cheat. It was a completely different level of sociopathy to research my tragic family history, hire a criminal, and forge DNA results just to secure a permanent pipeline into my bank account. I didn't cry. My tear ducts were dry, cauterized by a rage so absolute it felt like ice water in my veins. So, Jude murmured, do we call the cops? Press fraud charges? Absolutely not, I said, sliding the mugshot back into the folder. If I call the cops now, they get a slap on the wrist. Cade claims he was duped, Tess does probation, and they move on. No, I want them ruined. I want them to owe so much money they can't even afford to breathe. Jude's lips twitched into a dark, approving smirk. I knew I liked you. What's the play? I need to bleed my own company dry, I said smoothly. Set up an LLC in your name. Apex Design Group. Tomorrow, I'm legally transferring my 3 biggest commercial contracts, 80% of my revenue, over to Apex. Then, we fabricate massive supply chain liabilities for my current studio. Make it look like I'm drowning in debt. Jude tapped his pen. Legally tricky, but doable. By the time your fiancé gets his hands on the studio's financials, he'll be inheriting a sinking ship wrapped in a tax nightmare. Exactly. Now I just need to sell the performance of a lifetime. When I walked into the townhouse an hour later, I looked like a woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I had deliberately smudged mascara, pulled my hair into a frantic knot, and carried a stack of intimidating red-stamped envelopes. Faye was lounging on the emerald sofa, flipping through a luxury travel magazine. Cade and Tess were at the kitchen island, sharing imported grapes. I dropped my leather tote bag onto the hardwood floor with a loud thud. The heavy sigh I let out was worthy of an Oscar. Gwen, finally. Faye complained without looking up. The Wi-Fi has been acting up, and the pool guy said our maintenance check bounced. You need to call the bank immediately. I slumped into one of the velvet dining chairs, burying my face in my hands. I let out a dry, perfectly pitched sob. Cade was at my side in an instant. Hey babe, what's wrong? You look awful. It's the studio, I whispered, my voice trembling. I looked up, making sure to make direct eye contact with Tess, who had stopped chewing her grape. We lost the Henderson account. And the supplier in Italy is suing us. Cade. We're completely underwater. The micro-expressions that flashed across their faces were a masterpiece. Cade's jaw slacked, blood draining. Faye slowly lowered her magazine, her eyes widening in horror at losing her free ride. What do you mean underwater? Cade stammered, his hands dropping awkwardly. You have hundreds of thousands in the reserve accounts. They're gone, I choked out, wiping a fake tear. Frozen by the creditors. I met with a bankruptcy lawyer today. Honestly, Cade, I don't know how we're going to pay for the wedding. Or the groceries. I turned to Faye, giving her my most pathetic look. Faye, I'm so sorry, but I'm going to have to cut off your supplementary credit card permanently. In fact, the lawyer suggested we might need to take out a second mortgage on this townhouse just to keep the studio's lights on. Faye looked like she was about to go into cardiac arrest. Mortgage the house? But where will we live? Gwen, this is incredibly irresponsible. I know, I wailed softly. I'm a failure. Thank God I have you guys to support me through sickness and in health, right? I looked at Tess. The traumatized orphan looked like she had swallowed battery acid. Her dream of marrying into wealth was disintegrating. Of course we support you, babe, Cade lied, his voice tight, his eyes darting frantically toward Tess. We'll figure it out. You're the best, I sniffled, standing up. I'm going to take a bath and cry. Please don't bother me. I walked upstairs, my shoulders shaking not from sobs, but from the violent effort of holding back maniacal laughter. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for the rats to start biting each other. It didn't take long. 3 days later, the atmosphere in the townhouse was toxic. Faye was throwing daily tantrums about generic cereal, and Cade was sweating through his shirts, terrified of a repo man. It was a rainy Tuesday night when the pressure cooker snapped. I was supposedly asleep, but monitoring the hidden cameras. I watched Tess violently shove her dinner plate away and storm upstairs, locking herself in the guest bathroom. Cade immediately pulled out his phone in the kitchen. I slipped out of bed, creeping down the hallway, pressing my back against the wall outside the guest bathroom door. I pulled out my phone, hit the voice memo app, and slid the device right up against the crack of the doorframe. Inside, Tess wasn't using her sweet, fragile sister voice anymore. She sounded like a cornered viper. Are you out of your damn mind, Cade? She hissed furiously into her phone. You told me this bitch was a gold mine. You told me all I had to do was play the pathetic orphan sister for a few months, and we'd have full control of her assets after the wedding. A pause. I could faintly hear Cade's panicked, muffled voice. I don't care what the accountant says, Tess snapped, her voice rising in hysteria. I'm not doing this anymore. I didn't sign up to be poor. If she defaults on this house, I am taking whatever jewelry she has left, and I'm ghosting. I'm not playing little orphan Annie for a broke loser. I stared at the recording timer ticking upward on my screen. 30 seconds of pure, unadulterated blackmail material. I stopped the recording, saved the file to a secure cloud server, and smiled in the dark hallway. Run, little rat, I thought. Run as fast as you can. The maze is already locked. If you want to destroy a parasite, you cut off the blood supply and watch it turn on its own kind. The audio file of Tess threatening to ghost my broke loser of a fiancé was the exact leverage I needed for Phase 2. They were already suffocating under the fabricated weight of my impending bankruptcy. Now, it was time to throw a single life preserver into the shark tank. I started with Faye. My dear sweet mother-in-law had a secret offshore slush fund. In my past life, I only found out during our joint taxes 300 grand she had hoarded, while happily letting me pay for her Botox and organic groceries. It was time for a wealth redistribution. On Wednesday morning, I sat at the kitchen island, intensely staring at my laptop, biting my thumbnail. I had deliberately left a glossy prospectus for an invite-only Dubai crypto equity fund open on the counter. Faye wandered in. Her eyes immediately darted to the gold-embossed folder. What's that, Gwen? More debt? She asked, voice dripping with disdain. Actually, no, I whispered, glancing around like I was sharing state secrets. I slammed the laptop shut. It's a closed-door investment pool a billionaire client slipped me. It's yielding a guaranteed 200% return in 30 days. It could literally save the studio and pay off the house. But the minimum buy-in is $200,000, and the bank won't unfreeze my assets in time. I'm going to lose the only lifeline we have. I let out a tragic sigh and buried my face in my hands. Through the gaps, I watched Faye's beady eyes lock onto the prospectus. The greed radiating off her was radioactive. She took her espresso and practically sprinted back to her room. By noon, Jude texted me a single thumbs-up emoji. Faye had taken the bait. wiring her entire secret nest egg into Jude's untraceable dummy corporation. She was officially penniless. 1 down. 2 to go. Taking down Tess required a different kind of bait. You can't tempt a narcissist's mistress with stock options. You have to dangle a bigger, shinier ego. Enter Julian. Jude had fabricated a flawless Instagram persona for a 30-something venture capitalist who split his time between Silicon Valley and a yacht in Monaco. Julian started sliding into Tess's DMs on her secret alternate account, the one where she didn't pretend to be a traumatized orphan. With my bankruptcy looming, Tess was a starving rat looking for a new ship. Julian promised to fly her to Santorini. Julian sent her pictures of a black Amex. Julian was everything Cade pretended to be, but with actual receipts. The shift in the townhouse's ecosystem was instantaneous. By Friday, Tess had completely stopped looking at Cade. She was glued to her phone, a smug smirk playing on her lips. She started wearing her hair differently. She dug out a pair of sky-high Louboutins I had supposedly donated and strutted around. Cade's fragile ego couldn't handle the sudden drop. He was used to Tess worshipping him. Now, his mistress was icing him out. I played the oblivious, stressed-out bride, retreating to my bedroom to cry over spreadsheets. In reality, I was eating gourmet popcorn, watching the live feed from my hidden cameras. Friday night, 11:45 p.m. The pressure cooker finally blew. On the screen, Cade paced the kitchen, downing cheap bourbon. Tess waltzed in, typing furiously on her phone, giggling at something Julian had sent. She didn't acknowledge Cade as she reached for water. Cade snapped. He lunged, snatching the phone from her grip. "Hey!" Tess shrieked, her sweet orphan facade instantly melting into pure street trash venom. "Give that back, you psycho!" "Who the hell is Julian?" Cade hissed, his voice trembling with rage and insecurity. He scrolled wildly, the blue light of the screen illuminating the terror in his eyes as he read the messages. "Monaco? You're sending him pictures from my bed? Are you out of your damn mind, Sarah?" He used her real name. The ultimate breach. Tess lunged for the phone, her acrylic nails digging into his forearm. "Don't you ever call me that! And yeah, I'm talking to Julian. What did you expect? You told me Gwen was a cash cow. Now she's mortgaging the house. I'm not playing your fake sister so we can clip coupons." "I brought you here!" Cade roared, shoving her backwards so hard her hips slammed against the granite counter. "You were nothing! A 2-bit scammer rotting in a studio apartment. I gave you this life. You belong to me. I belong to whoever has the biggest bank account. You broke, pathetic parasite." Tess screamed, her face flushed with manic rage. "You don't have a dime without Gwen. You're just a leech wearing a nice suit." The slap echoed through the kitchen, sharp and brutal. On my iPad, I watched Tess's head snap to the side. She froze, touching her stinging cheek, her eyes widening. Cade stood there, chest heaving. Tess didn't cry. She slowly turned back to him, her eyes dead and cold. "You are going to regret that," she whispered, her voice a terrifying rasp. "I am going to bleed you entirely dry, Cade." She snatched her phone and stormed out, leaving Cade alone in the suffocating silence of his ruined kingdom. Upstairs in my bed, I took a slow, satisfying bite of popcorn. Above the kitchen sink, the tiny red LED light of my hidden 4K camera blinked. I had the forgery. I had the confession. I had the assault. The net wasn't just closed. It was tied, weighted, and ready to be dropped into the deepest part of the ocean. The morning after the kitchen cage match, the townhouse felt like a ticking bomb. Tess sat at the kitchen island with thick foundation over her left cheek, aggressively stirring coffee. Cade stood by the espresso machine, looking like he hadn't slept in a decade. The hatred vibrating between them was humming. I walked in, rubbing my eyes to smear the gray eyeshadow I'd applied to look like a woman on the verge of psychological collapse. "Family meeting?" I whispered, my voice trembling perfectly. "Living room. Now." They dragged themselves to my velvet sofa, sitting on opposite ends. Faye shuffled in, pale and twitchy. She was still waiting for her guaranteed returns. I stood in front of the fireplace, clutching a thick manila folder. I let out a ragged, pathetic sigh and let the first fake tear spill. I can't do this anymore. I choked out, staring at the floor. I'm breaking. The stress of the studio, the suppliers suing us, the wedding. My mental health is completely shattered. Cade instantly perked up. Gwen, babe, it's okay. I'm here. We're here. I know you are, I sniffled, looking up at him with wide, trusting eyes. Which is why I made a decision. I spoke to the lawyers this morning. I'm stepping down. Silence. Stepping down? Tess repeated, cautious. I'm transferring full legal ownership, operational control, and all executive banking rights of the studio to you, Cade, I said softly, wiping my cheeks. As a wedding gift. And Tess, because you're my precious sister, I'm naming you as the vice president and primary co-signer on all corporate accounts. For 3 agonizing seconds, nobody breathed. The sheer, unadulterated greed wiping the hatred from their faces was a psychological marvel. They didn't see a failing company. They saw prestige, limitless credit, and the illusion of power. Gwen, are you sure? Cade asked, breathless, his dark eyes dilating with lust. Not for me, for the power. I'm sure, I nodded weakly, dropping the folder onto the coffee table. I just want to be a housewife. I want you to be the man of the house, Cade. I've already drafted the preliminary transfer agreements and assumption of liability forms. If you and Tess sign them today, the lawyers will finalize the transfer on Monday, right after we say I do. Tess practically lunged for the pen. She didn't read a single line. She didn't look at the fine print that explicitly stated she and Cade were personally guaranteeing the corporate debts. She just saw vice president and signed her fake name with a vicious, triumphant flourish. Cade was right behind her, his signature sloppy with adrenaline. Watching them sign their own financial death warrants was a spiritual experience. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken me down, manipulated my insecurities, and legally stolen my empire. In reality, my empire was already safely parked in Jude's dummy LLC. What they had just eagerly acquired was a hollow, rotting shell, carrying $3 million in fabricated tax liabilities, broken supplier contracts, and defaulted loans. They were fighting for the captain's chair on the Titanic. The next 48 hours were a comedy of errors. Cade and Tess completely dropped their feud. They were best friends again, whispering excitedly, already planning how they would fire my staff and liquidate the studio's assets. Cade even started wearing a tie around the house. I spent the time quietly packing my most valuable jewelry and documents into a sleek Rimowa suitcase, telling Faye I was making a donation pile. Then came Friday. The night before the wedding, the Seattle rain was relentless. Cade was out at his bachelor party paid for with a high-interest payday loan he took out as CEO. Tess and Faye were at a luxury spa, charging champagne to a hotel room they thought I was paying for. I zipped up my black leather trench coat, grabbed my keys, and walked out of the townhouse for the very last time. I drove through the slick streets until I reached Jude's office. His office was dim, illuminated by a desk lamp and city lights. He sat behind his mahogany desk, pouring 2 glasses of 18-year-old Macallan. You look like a woman who just committed the perfect crime, Jude noted smoothly, sliding a heavy crystal glass across the desk. I took off my damp coat and sank into the leather chair, taking a slow, burning sip. I didn't commit a crime, Jude. I just let the garbage take itself out. Jude's sharp gray eyes gleamed with dark amusement. He tapped a sleek silver flash drive. Everything is locked and loaded. The financial transfer is fully binding as of midnight tonight. The IRS tip-off for corporate fraud is scheduled for Monday morning, and this drive contains the 4K footage of your fiancé assaulting his mistress, along with the audio of their blackmail session. I've already forwarded it to the church's AV guy. He owed me a massive favor. I looked at the silver drive. It was so small, yet it held the absolute destruction of 3 human lives. The press? I asked softly. 2 local investigative journalists have VIP seats in the 3rd row. The entire extended family is confirmed, Jude said. He looked at me, his expression turning intense. There is no walking back from this, Gwen. Tomorrow, You burn your own house down to trap the rats. Are you ready? I set my glass down, a cold, empty smile spreading across my face as the thunder cracked outside. I've already died once, Jude, I whispered. I'm more than ready to send them to hell. Walking down the aisle to a string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon is a lot easier when you know it's not a wedding, but a public execution. The church was packed to the rafters. Cade's family, my former high-profile clients, socialites, and 2 eager investigative journalists. The air smelled of white lilies, burning wax, and impending doom. Tess stood at the altar in her custom champagne bridesmaid dress, playing the tearful maid of honor. She gave me a watery, angelic smile as I approached, calculating how long it would take to pawn my diamond ring. Cade looked like he had just won the Super Bowl. He took my hands, radiating that manufactured, golden boy charm that used to make my knees weak. Now, his skin against mine just made me want to sanitize my hands with bleach. You look perfect, he mouthed, his eyes shining with fake adoration. I smiled back, cold, empty, and terrifyingly calm. You have no idea. The priest droned on about love. I kept my eyes locked on Cade's face, memorizing his arrogant confidence. I wanted to remember what he looked like before I broke his entire reality. Do you, Cade? The priest finally asked, his voice echoing. Take Gwen to be your lawfully wedded wife? Cade didn't blink. I do. And do you, Gwen, take Cade to be your lawfully wedded husband? The silence stretched. Cade's perfect smile faltered. Tess shifted uncomfortably, shooting a confused glance at the priest. In the front pew, Faye dabbed her dry eyes, oblivious. I didn't look at the priest. I looked right up into the AV balcony, gave a subtle nod, and turned back to my soon-to-be ex-fiancé. Actually, I said, my voice carrying crystal clear through the lapel mic, I think we need to review the prenup first. Before Cade could process, the massive motorized projector screen we had installed behind the altar whirred to life and dropped violently from the ceiling. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The church plunged into suffocating silence, instantly shattered by Tess's voice booming through the cinematic surround sound speakers. I didn't sign up to be poor. I'm not spending the best years of my life playing your fake sister so we can clip coupons. The 4K hidden camera footage from my kitchen lit up the dark church. There was Tess, snarling. There was Cade, looking like a pathetic, cornered rat. I brought you here. You were nothing. A 2-bit scammer rotting in a studio apartment. I gave you this life. The collective gasp from 300 guests sucked the oxygen out of the room. I watched the blood violently drain from Cade's face, leaving him sickly, chalky white. His hands, still holding mine, went entirely numb. I casually slipped my fingers out of his dead grip and took a step back. Tess dropped her custom silk bouquet. It hit the marble floor. She stared at the massive screen, her jaw unhinged, her fake orphan persona vaporizing. Then came the slap on the video. The sharp crack of Cade hitting Tess echoed through the sanctuary, followed by Tess's venomous threat. I am going to bleed you entirely dry, Cade. But the AV guide didn't stop there. The video cut to a sleek split screen. On the left, Tess complaining to Cade on her phone. Faye is such a clueless old bat. As soon as we get the studio, I'm putting her in a discount nursing home. On the right, a high-res scan of the forged DNA test alongside a police mugshot of Sarah, the small-time credit card fraudster currently standing at the altar in a champagne dress. Absolute, unadulterated chaos erupted. Someone screamed. A journalist's camera flashed. In the front row, Faye let out a sound that was half gasp, half strangled shriek. Right on cue, her phone buzzed loudly. Jude had timed the automated email perfectly. Faye pulled out her phone with shaking hands, read the notification from the fake Dubai crypto fund, confirming her $300,000 account balance was permanently frozen and under federal investigation, and promptly collapsed onto the floor, in a dead faint. Cade spun toward me, his eyes wide with animalistic terror. Gwen, please, it's a deepfake. I swear, it's AI. It's not real. I casually reached over to the wooden podium and pulled the microphone. Save the gaslighting for the judge, Cade, I said, my voice cutting through the screaming crowd like a scythe. The wedding is officially cancelled, but congratulations on your new promotion. He stared at me, trembling so hard his bespoke suit vibrated. As of midnight last night, the legal transfer cleared, I announced calmly, making sure the journalists caught every syllable. You and Tess, are now the sole executive owners of my former studio, which means you are personally, legally liable for its $3 million in fabricated corporate debt, the pending IRS tax fraud investigation dropping on Monday, and the massive supplier lawsuits I finalized yesterday. You wanted my empire so badly? Keep it. It's a graveyard. Sarah let out a guttural, hysterical scream and lunged at Cade, her manicured claws aiming right for his eyes. You absolute idiot. You told me it was a gold mine. You ruined my life. Cade grabbed her wrists, shoving her back into the altar arrangements. Glass vases shattered. Lilies and water rained down on them. They were literally tearing each other apart on the marble steps. Two rats trapped in a burning cage fighting over the ashes of a life they tried to steal. I didn't stay to watch the blood draw. I reached back, grabbed the heavy zipper of my 50-pound ivory silk gown, and yanked it violently down. The massive dress pulled to the floor, revealing the sleek, black-tailored suit I had worn underneath the entire time. I picked up my bridal bouquet of blood-red roses, walked over to where Cade and Sarah were rolling in the shattered glass, and casually tossed it right onto Cade's chest. Catch, I muttered. I turned my back on the screaming, the crying, and the complete destruction of my abusers, and walked straight down the center aisle. The massive oak doors of the church stood wide open, letting the cold air pour in. Outside, the Seattle rain had finally stopped, leaving the pavement slick and glistening. Jude was leaning against the hood of a sleek black town car, holding 2 steaming cups of black coffee. He pushed himself off the car as I approached. So, Jude drawled, a dark, devastating smirk playing on his lips as he handed me a coffee. Did you leave any survivors? I took a slow sip, the bitter caffeine tasting exactly like absolute victory. I looked back at the blinding flashes of the paparazzi cameras lighting up the stained glass windows. Not a single one, I replied. I slid into the passenger seat, slammed the door shut, and left the ghosts exactly where they belonged 6 feet under.